You're listening to the Dibbly-Dobbly podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Let's move on to our next topic, Graham, and let's talk about the importance of working on the mental skills of cricket. We're going to be talking about a lot about that in this discussion. More to come a bit later, but the mental skills or the mental side of cricket is a topic that goes unnoticed in the game of cricket. Not many speak about it or talk about it a lot. And I heard a saying once, Graham, that cricket is 90% mental, 10% skill, but players focus on the 10% rather than the 90%. And Graham, as we all know, cricket is played above the shoulders. And you mentioned this in chapter 2, why cricket is played above the shoulders in mindful cricket. And the mental skills in cricket are important skills to master within the game of cricket. It's great if you have all the skills and talent in the world, but if you don't work on the mental skills of the game, your performance will suffer. And we've seen over the game's history, many good players who were technically sound, had all the skills, but once they reached the top level or international level, they didn't perform as well. And they didn't really make the most of their potential, and they had substandard careers in cricket. The mental skills you learn from cricket, you can apply them to your everyday life, and they have benefits, as we all know. Batting, bowling, wicket-keeping, and fielding present challenges to players in form of a mental and physical challenge. So it's important to have the right mindset and mental skills to cope with these challenges during games. You also mentioned in the book, Graham, in chapter 2, why technique is overrated. You said our basic ability to bat, bowl, keep, and field doesn't change, but form comes and goes. So what cricketers do always is go down to the nets, spend hours in the nets just working on their technique, just to be more frustrated after they finish the training session, and they still haven't achieved anything. You then went on to say that the difference is mindset. Even the best players in the world have flaws in their techniques. Despite those flaws, they're still able to score runs, take wickets in all forms of the game. So, and you also say technique and talent are overrated. It is clear that confident, composed minds make runs and take wickets. So that goes back to the saying I said earlier, that cricket is 90% mental, 10% skill, but players focus on the 10% and not focusing on the important part, which is the 90%. So, Graham, why is it important to work on the mental skills of the game? And do we need to change the way that coaches teach the mental skills to players within the game of cricket?
Definitely. I shouldn't try and answer it with one word. Let me approach it from this angle. Think about sports. You know, your listeners think about tennis. Tennis player wants to practice tennis. They practice it on a tennis court. It's the same shape, space that they're going to be competing if they go to Wimbledon or US Open or whatever. Football, they go out on the ground and they've got the same shaped ground, and okay, the conditions might change. But then you've got cricket nets, and then you've got the game out in the middle. So there are not too many games right across. And I guess having worked with Olympic teams over a number of years, I can attest, having worked in so many different settings, there are not that many sports where the practice environment is so substantially different to the competitive environment, as is the case with cricket. And if you then add to that, for a batsman, one mistake, or maybe you don't even make a mistake, you're out. For the bowler, the results that you get by taking wickets are not like a shooter who lines up and shoots at the target. If they get it right, they hit the middle. As a bowler, you rarely take the wicket on the ball that you actually planned to take. It's more of more something that builds up over time. So I think what cricket and the leading coaches, I think, are now starting to do this more. I think they're starting to recognise that you can, in the nets, definitely practice technique, and that's an important part. And I don't want to underestimate. And I don't know that it's necessarily a 90%, 10%, because it's, to some extent, it's a pyramid. And if you don't have the base pyramid or base technique and so on, then you're not going to be able to go out and perform. But there comes a point where further work on technique is not going to make the difference. What's going to make the difference is whether the player can have a level of confidence to play their game, whether they understand what the limitations are of their game, whether they can read what's going on within that particular match, whether they can deal with distractions either from their own thoughts or from what's going on in the game, and make the right decisions. And I think, therefore, the issue for coaches becomes, how do you create a practice environment where, at the moment, I go out to your typical cricket practice and players want to face the maximum number of deliveries they can. Well, you're only going to be facing 6 balls and over at most. You're probably going to be more likely facing 3, and your mate's going to be facing the other 3. You're going to be running in between them. If you make a mistake, you're going to be out. You're going to have a small number of gaps in which to score. You're going to have a series of problems that need to be solved. So I believe that there are a series of things that you can do from a practice perspective that better simulate the sorts of challenges that you face in matches. And then I think you can supplement that with more specific mental skills training, like mindfulness practices and so on. Whereas I think what cricket has tended to do is to sort of see this thing called sports psychology as being relaxation, visualization, and goal setting that you do at home. And then you go out in the nets, and then somehow you match those two together and go out and perform. The chances of that happening are none and zero, because the last thing you learn is the first thing that's going to fall apart under pressure. So I think the challenge for cricket, and I guess a shout out to Sean Seagard at Root Academy. I mean, I think he's one of the leading edge coaches that I see, creating genuinely high performance simulated environments for players in nets, so that there are consequences for the players, so they're subjected to pressure. So when they get into match situations, they've already practiced making decisions, starting their innings, etc. So a little bit long-winded, but I think the fundamental issue is that the practice environment of nets is different to the match situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the challenge that cricket has, isn't it? Trying to replicate match conditions in the nets.
Exactly.
That's the hardest thing to do, because it's not the same. You're not under that same pressure as you're in a test match, for example, with men around the bat. You just have nets, and it's not quite the same. So it's a barrier that it's always going to be there. But how do we find ways and methods to get better and incorporate the mental skills in cricket? And I think cricket at times can be bound to traditions as well, and it's a very traditional sport, and people get, I wouldn't be doing that, that's against the coaching manual or whatever. But players and coaches are going against the coaching manual anyway. Times have changed.
Really. The modern coaches, and that's not necessarily ages. I can think of Toot Byron. I don't think Toot wouldn't mind me saying, we're similar vintage. He's 20, 30 years ahead of his time. He's been helping Australian teams to practice and get ready to go into the subcontinent conditions and so on for years, by simulating those conditions and by making sure that there are, basically, it's the conversation I've had with Greg Chappell on numerous occasions. It's like, how do you create environments in which players have got problems that they need to solve, versus just getting them into the nets? So it's quality practice over quantity. It's thinking about adaptability rather than repetition, and it's just genuinely thinking about how do you simplify the mental game. I think, and we might talk about this anyway, but I might sort of jump in. I guess the two things I always ask players to do when they think about their mindset is to what extent can they own their space. So I just look at a player and go, when I see you go out on the field as a bowler, as a batter, as a keeper, I want to look at how you own your space. So in other words, how do you look on the field? Do you look like you've got a rhythm? Do you look like you're balanced? Do you look like you're in control of what you're doing? And do you do that consistently? So what's your natural? And a Steve Smith's rhythm is completely different to a David Warner's rhythm, or to a Travis Head. And the ditto with the bowlers. And then the second thing is, when you're under pressure and you are playing, can you hold your shape? So as a bowler, can you hold your shape and your rhythm and so on? As a batter, can you hold whatever that shape is for you? And I find when I'm working with cricketers, that's a really useful starting point, because you can put them in the nets, and even things like just get them to sprint up and down a few times, and then get them to bowl some deliveries, or just get them to with some consequences around what's going to happen, and then get them to start reflecting on the extent to which they're owning space and holding shape. And then the other piece around that is, to what extent am I applying pressure and to what extent am I absorbing pressure? So again, in the nets, if you've got bowlers and batters working together in tandem, they can be applying pressure to each other. Even just, we've done some work at Prince Alfred College here, and it's fascinating. You get I could always remember one of the conversations with with a batter and a bowler. We had a left-handed bowler who was bowling. He felt, because we were asking him, so what do you want to do to apply pressure? He said, I want to get the ball to bounce and kick away. We then went down to the batsman and said, you just faced 5 deliveries from this bowler. Where are you experiencing pressure or not experiencing pressure? He said the first 3 deliveries were right on the spot and I couldn't get them away. That's where I felt the pressure. I don't worry about the ball that bounces up. I'm not going to nick that anyway. And as these guys got used to having more and more conversations with each other, the bowlers learned what it was that actually pressured the batsman, and the batsman learned ditto the same way around. So I think just turning psychology into those simple language, am I owning my space? Do I look like I've got a routine and a ritual, or am I going away from it? Am I holding my shape or not? And then how do I apply pressure? How do I absorb? That, I think, gets us out of the sort of psychological mumbo jumbo that is, on one hand, not helpful, but then also probably fires up the traditionalist who goes, yeah, well, that's just not part of cricket. And I suppose my comment to sort of cricketers over the years is, I don't expect you to believe in sports psychologists, but you can't seriously tell me that sports psychology is not a fundamental part of cricket. And you'll always get a begrudging yes. So therefore, I think where psychology's failed is creating those sorts of practice environments that Root Academy and so on are now using as the sort of standard for developing players.
Absolutely. Hi everyone, hope you enjoyed our cricket discussion with former first-class cricketer and sports psychologist Graham Winter. If you want to improve and get better as a cricketer, I highly recommend reading Graham's book, Mindful Cricket. After reading the book myself, I learnt loads about the mental side of cricket and how, by having the right mindset, can help you to be the best cricketer you can possibly be. Head over to Mindful Cricket to get a copy of the book. Link to Mindful Cricket website is in the description.